Meeting for March the 16th to order. I know Senator Pittman is in line to get some pictures taken and should arrive shortly. Today, our agenda includes working the remaining bills that we have in committee. Let's start with House Bill 2110, which is requiring insurance coverage for PANs and PANDAs under the Healthcare State Benefits Program on the test track. Does anyone need an overview of that? Okay. Is there a motion from the committee? Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee passes out favorably House Bill 2110.
Is there a second? Senator Clue seconds. Any discussion? Senator Gossage.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this bill. I have deep concerns about any time we try to put a mandate on insurance companies, especially, and there are always heart-wrenching stories. And I have helped many of those parents try to find coverage and try to find access for their child. All of the things that we heard about with this family, and they have gone through the proper process, and Representative Ousley, Dr. Ousley. However, whenever you have a mandate on an insurance company, you also have the families who are struggling to try to pay for their health insurance premiums. And currently, this would raise premiums, and not just this one, but if this one's passed, then where does it end? And it kind of opens a Pandora's box of everybody coming in with, but what about this condition, or what about that condition, and why aren't we requiring insurance companies cover this? Typically what happens is that if an insurance company finds that a particular drug is effective for a particular condition, eventually what we see is that it is covered. But my concern is doing it through legislation. So as the family mentioned, they were able to treat their child with ibuprofen, oral steroids, dietary changes, and play therapy. All of the tests that they would have had to try to figure out what is wrong with their child would have been covered under their insurance. As a mother myself, my daughter went through a very serious condition when the latter part of 5th grade. It took us 2 years with lots of different tests to figure out what in the world was going on. When finally one doctor figured out the diagnosis, I certainly understand the angst and the frustration from parents who have had a very difficult time just trying to get a diagnosis. It seems that the legislation is forcing insurance companies to cover a very expensive medication that may or may not is considered right now in testing to see if it could or could not work for this condition. So I would have to be a no on this, even though I do very much empathize with the family. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gossage. I will remind the committee that there is a long-standing process on these type of mandates, that this is the first step that goes through to the state employees health plan, where the cost of this is actually studied. And then if it is decided by the legislature in a separate bill after that test track is done, then the legislature could decide whether to mandate that as coverage to all insurance companies. This is the authorization for the test track, so there is no mandate on private insurance at this point. Any other discussion on the bill? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question on Representative Epley's deal. He talked about this being recorded as an ICD-10 code. And on Siegel, it was talking about effective January 1, this was an ICD-11 diagnosis. And I didn't know if there was anybody in the room that could tell me the difference between a 10 or 11 and which one this was. If we don't, I don't know how high that number goes and exactly what that says to us.
Eileen, do you have any information on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just off the top of my head, I know ICD 10 and 11 codes are billing codes. I can look it up for you really fast if you,
Well, I don't think it's probably that necessary. If somebody knew off the top of their head, I'd be okay. I just didn't know the difference between 10 and 11 and what supposedly the higher the number goes, the better it is. So it looked like the word from what I heard the other day. I just thought that was interesting that he had one and they had the other. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm seeing is it says in terms of general improvements, the ICD 11 has a more sophisticated structure than the ICD 10, with around 55,000 codes that can be used to classify diseases, disorders, injuries, and illnesses and causes of death. The ICD 11 offers a fine level of detail in coding these illnesses. So apparently, the ICD 11 provides a level of detail greater than the ICD 10.
okay, thank you.
Senator Gossage, do you have another question?
Do we know how many families are in the Kansas Employees Health Insurance Plan?
I do not.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on 2110? We have a motion and we have a second. I'm sorry, Senator Cluse.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Senator Gossett's comments along this topic and understand she makes some valid points. And the process alone, I think, will also help draw attention to the needs of these families and in hopes that, there'll be a greater awareness. And I think it'll be good for the body to hear this and make decisions. And I appreciate the clarity that you had brought out as well. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. 2110 is passed out. Let's now turn our attention to House Bill 2489. House Bill 2489 was amending provisions of the Technology-Enabled Fiduciary Financial Institutions Act relating to fees and assessments, examinations, disclosure. It was the cleanup bill that we worked on between the Office of the State Banking Commissioner and Beneficient for the pilot program. Does anybody need an overview on the base bill? Okay. We do have an amendment that has been worked on between the OSBC and Beneficient, commonly referred to in our inner circles as the duck amendment. Right, Eileen?
That's it.
If it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And so would you explain the balloon to us?
I will do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I admit I did not draft this, but I was a little quackers going through it. So, all right, you guys, I'm trying. It's Wednesday. Trying really hard. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to do this in the order it makes sense. So if you all would please flip to page 5, or the page that's marked 5. The box you see there is the actual duck amendment, and there's a provision that you'll see in paragraph 2 and 3. It's the same provision. Paragraph 2 applies to a trust company or out-of-state trust company, and paragraph 3 applies to a bank or out-of-state bank. But basically, the provision says that if the entity, being a trust company or bank, or an out-of-state trust company or out-of-state bank engages in a FIDFIN transactions in the state, then the entity shall be considered a fiduciary financial institution for purposes of the act, and then it shall have all the rights and powers granted to a fiduciary financial institution and shall owe all duties and obligations imposed on a fiduciary financial institution under the Act, including the financial duties imposed under KSA 9-2311 and 9-2313 and the requirements of 9-2302. Again, as I said, those apply in 2 and 3, so they're parallel amendments. Then we've got the statement, there's an additional statement that the capitalization requirements and the board of director requirements and naming conventions, that's all current requirements, but those requirements would, would still apply to those entities. Would not be subject to those provisions. I wrote really, really small. It's really small. So now if you turn to page 4, just flip the page back. Those are the defined terms for out-of-state bank and out-of-state financial institution and out-of-state trust company. Those are what you would need to use the terms in the Duck Amendment itself. And then on page 11, it's really intimidating looking, but it's really not. This amends KSA 9-2304, and basically we're inserting a provision that says there's an exception for these entities that are going to engage in FIDFIN transactions. So this statute is basically a statute that states what provisions of the banking code are applicable, any exceptions and conflicts. So there are going to be exceptions provided. That's that first underline in subsection A. And then if you look at subsection B, it's again parallel amendments in B and C for Kansas chartered state trust companies that receive authority to engage in FIDFIN transactions under KSA 9-2302. And in subsection C, it's Kansas chartered state banks that receive authority to engage in FIDFIN transactions under the same statute. So those two entities, basically it's saying subsection A would not apply. Sorry, I thought somebody was talking to me. But references to trust businesses and business of a trust company include the FIDFIN and fiduciary financial institution businesses. Then in paragraph D1, we're adding except as provided in paragraph 2 if any conflict exists between provisions of the banking code and this act. The act would control, but paragraph 2 is going to control in that circumstance. So basically, paragraph 2 states if the fiduciary financial institution is a bank department or a trust company that received authority to engage in FIDFIN transactions, the provision of this act would control only with regard to FIDFIN transactions as authorized under 9-2302. And the provisions of this section, so this statute would not apply to an out-of-state financial institution. Then on the first page in the title, those are just corresponding amendments to the title to incorporate the amendments that were made to the bill itself. And with that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Eileen. It does look very intimidating, but let me try to explain to you the purpose of it. I think there was a discovery that there was a possible loophole that would have allowed an out-of-state trust company or even possibly an in-state trust company to enter into FIDFIN transactions in the state without falling under the FIDFIN Act. In other words, they would not have to pay the fees, they would not have to contribute the 2.5% to the economic development. So this amendment closes that loophole to make sure that if you're going to engage in FIDFIN transactions, that you are working under the FIDFIN Act, not Normal Banking Act. So, any questions of Eileen? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eileen, I was just on page 11, when you have that balloon that goes out section 4 KSA, and then you go back into it and it's got marked out to 7 and it's got 4 there. Should that be a 5? I just was trying to decide why that 4 is in there versus the 4 that's stuck out there.
Senator Fagg, I think you may be right on that, and I will make sure. This probably didn't make it through proofing because it was finalized very late yesterday. So it will go through the proofing process, and if it needs to be amended, the section numbers need to be changed, they will be changed. But I believe it does look like you're correct on that.
Senator Fagg?
One more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4, at number 15 out there by itself, is that needed in there on that balloon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is actually correct, because what's going to happen is the 12 is now going to be the out-of-state bank reference, so everything will shift down. So 12 becomes out-of-state bank, 13 becomes out-of-state financial institution, 14 becomes out-of-state trust company, but that leaves that qualified investment language that was 12. So we need to designate that as the 15 to join the language that was left over.
Thank you.
Sure.
Senator Gossage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, Eileen, you're incredible. That's it.
Additional comments, questions on the amendment or on Eileen's work? It's actually David's work, but what's the pleasure of the committee on the amendment? I'll move the amendment. I've got seconds everywhere. Pittman. Any further discussion on the amendment? Pittman. Me. It's all schematics. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We are back on the bill. What's the pleasure of the committee on the bill? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we move House Bill number 2489 as amended out favorably.
Is there a second? Olson seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, let's now turn our attention to House Bill 2490, which is the House version of the ABLE Act that we passed earlier in session. It is identical, I believe. Eileen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We amended the effective date. They did not. So it's not
Exactly.
technically identical.
So we'll have to go to conference and argue over a date.
I believe that we thought it was really, really important work, and The House didn't.
Right. So, Senator Pittman, did you have a motion on 2490?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we pass 2489 out favorably for passage.
2490.
And also, I'd like to make the motion here that we pass 2490 out favorably for passage.
Olson seconds. Any discussion? Senator Hildebrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was it the intent to make sure this went in the registry and not the statute book?
Yeah, I think there was a difference of opinion between the House and the Senate on how soon we needed to do this.
Because if this goes out, it's the statute book, and if we pass it on the floor. So might want to talk about that in conference to get that worked out.
Yeah.
Okay, I would make a substitute motion then to conceptually amend this to change that to, from the statute book to the,
I think we're better off leaving it the way it is.
okay, because if this is a House bill and it goes out like it is, it goes, and we vote on it on the floor, it goes to the governor, correct?
There could be a non-concur in the House.
What if we don't amend it?
There's kind of a swap process
Okay,
that's been mapped out.
I withdraw my motion.
Just schematics. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. 2490 is passed out. Let's go to 2510, which is the, was the bill that we had that raised the limits, investment limits on life insurance companies. It's pretty complicated. We may need an explanation from the reviser. Sure, give us one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is incredibly complicated, but I believe that the effective date is changing from the statute book to the Kansas Register because this is highly important work.
Olson moves the amendment. Is there a second? Gossage seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Back on the bill, is there a motion on 2510 as amended? Olson moves, Dietrich seconds. She got her second in there. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. 2510 is passed out. Okay, House Bill 2547 was the Captive Insurance Act. The House bill is identical to the Senate bill, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. And we don't have any amendments on this one, so did anybody want an overview? All right, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion that we pass out House Bill 2547 favorably for passage.
Is there a second? Gossage seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. 2547 is passed out. Okay, House Bill 2564, which is our complicated bill that we do every year, risk-based capital. And we do have an amendment on this one. Eileen, would you explain this one, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I will. Okay, so because this is the most exciting bill ever, and it's always the most exciting bill that we do, we decided to make it more exciting by amending it with another statute. So what happened, if you recall, last year, we codified the model reinsurance regulation, and that appeared in KSA 4221A. In doing so, if you look on the very first page of the attachment, the internal reference to paragraph 7 should have been a paragraph 8. So that needed to be corrected, and hence we're amending that and attaching it to the RBC bill. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 8 pages for one number. Just make sure I'm reading it correctly.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to make sure that if there were any particular senators who wanted to see the entire statute, just for the purposes of clarity and comprehension, that they would have it in the purposes of completeness.
Okay, we have a motion to move the amendment. We have a Olson and Pittman seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Amendment is passed. What is the committee's pleasure on 2564? Olson? Gossage seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. 2564 is amended as passed out. And 2568 is the Kansas Mortgage Act that allowed mortgage loan officers to work from home. We had testimony on that last week, early, I think. Anybody like an overview or review of the bill? Okay, what's the committee's pleasure on this one? Sure.
Do we know, I can't remember what the House, did they vote on this?
This is a House bill, so yes, I'm assuming.
Do we know what the vote count was on that when it came out? Is it on some
I
note?
think we do.
It was 118 to 3, Mr. Chair.
118 to 3 in the House. Okay. Is there a motion on the bill? Senator Dietrich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move that the committee passes out House Bill 2568 favorably for passage.
Is there a second? Bag seconds. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. 2568 is passed out. Okay, that takes care of all of the bills that we have in committee at this time. I will let the committee know that there is a possibility in the House of Senate Bill 28, which may be a changes to the PBM Act that is agreed upon, and if that is fully agreed upon when it comes over, then my intention would be to concur on that. If it's not fully agreed, then we will probably have to non-concur on that and discuss it in conference. So we're awaiting House action on that, so stay tuned to that. Other than that, this completes our work, so I'm going to give you the day off tomorrow and Friday. So anything else? Okay, we are adjourned.